Hey there, friend! Welcome back to the Closing Chapters podcast, where every mission has a story.
Why doesn't everybody have access to this? And be prepared and know what you're walking into. Listen, we bought the house anyway because it was in a great location. We loved the house. But I
Mhm.
also knew that there was lead paint, a probable lead paint in the house, and that there was knob and tube wiring in the house.
Hello, hello. Welcome back to Closing Chapters Everyday Podcast. And today I have a special guest. We have Bob from Property Lens. And Bob is going to tell us about a really cool report that he has put together and some of the background behind it and how we can utilize this in the real estate world. But let's go back to the basics. First, can you give us an overview about you? Who are you, Bob? What is your background? What is Property Lens? Tell us about it.
Sure. I'm Bob Frady. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Property Lens. Um, I guess I've always been kind of a curious kid. How do things work? Taking apart the
Yeah.
telephone, finding that magnet in the middle was always something I liked to do as a kid. And that's just sort of spread into my grown up life as well, where and data is my tool. I like to use data to solve questions. I built another company called Hazard Hub, which did with my co-founders, which did natural hazard risk assessment. Like, in the Carolinas, part of it's hurricane, some of it's flood.
Mhm.
Tennessee's got some wildfires and sinkholes. There's all sorts of different risks for different areas. And I bought a house and I went looking for like a Carfax for houses, and there wasn't anything. So
Yeah.
I got curious and decided to build it. And here we are, all
That's
these
awesome.
all these sleepless nights later.
So tell me, what is the basics of Property Lens? What does this report typically encapsulate? What would we find in it?
Okay, so the whole idea is that sellers know this about a house and buyers know this. And we're just trying to
Mhm.
shrink that gap so that the buyer walks into a house with sort of a pregame analysis of the house to say, based upon all the underlying data that we can find, here's what we see. So we focus on things like, how old is the roof? What condition is it in? What do the major systems look like in the house? Are they older? Are they approaching the end of their useful life? Have they been replaced or repaired? What work has been done and permitted at the house? What the flood zones are? What the perils are that the place is exposed to? But when you pull all that stuff together, it gets really confusing for people really fast. So we try to comb through it and say, here's the things you really want to focus on. Here's the questions that you really want to ask to the seller's agent, just so you can uncover what might be going on at a house
Mhm.
before you put down your earnest money and fall in love and then have to have all these bad things happen at closing because you didn't know about this stuff that you could have found out beforehand.
Yeah, I could definitely see the benefit there. It is very hard to tell a buyer, hey, you can't really look into so much until after we're under contract, and then you have your due diligence time where you can do
Yep.
any and all inspections that you want and start poking and prodding. But you're right, at that point, we've already, we've got skin in the game, and we've committed to the property to an extent. And we don't want to have the mindset of putting one foot in just to take it right back out. I mean, we should be committing to a property full force whenever we are writing a contract on it. So I think
Yep.
there is a huge benefit to having more of an overview before we ever walk through the door.
People, it really depends upon how much you like knowing about a property
Mhm.
before you want to put your money down on it. Like the house I bought a house in Minnesota, and I knew from digging up data and talking to a lot of my friends, I knew that the roof was pretty new, so didn't have to worry about it. I knew that there was a radon issue at the house, so I wanted to test for radon before we made the offer, and it turned out it was elevated.
Mhm.
And I said, you got to put a radon system in um, you before we'll buy the house. And they did. So I didn't have to pay for that, which is great. I also knew that there are ice dams at this property where ice builds up in the gutter and causes roof problems, which is why the roof was so new.
Okay.
And so little things like put gutter guards on all of the downspouts, a relatively low investment to save you a claim that you never want to have, because ice dams are terrible. Now maybe you don't have them as much in the Carolinas, but in the North especially, they're just terrible claims.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I thought, why doesn't everybody have access to this? And be prepared and know what you're walking into. Listen, we bought the house anyway because it was in a great location. We loved the house. But I
Hmm.
also knew that there was lead paint, a probable lead paint in the house, and that there was knob and tube wiring in the house, all of which is no longer in existence. But and so I knew all this stuff. So I was prepared to say,
Right.
I'm going to commit to this house because a house is a commitment. I need to. It's not just a place to stay. I
Hmm.
know I'm going to have to invest in this house. How much am I going to have to invest? So I took a little bit off the asking price, and they took it, which was great. But I also knew I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this, and was prepared when I walked in to know that this has to happen. And
Yes.
I felt better knowing what could happen, so I could prepare for it rather than
Hmm.
just waiting for something to come along and slap me upside the head and say, "Oh boy, your roof is 15 years old or 18 years old and needs to be replaced." So that's where we come from.
Yeah, I surprises are not fun. There's a couple of things that you just said that really I honed in on big time. When you're talking about the ice concern, I have never heard of that in my life. I've heard
Mhm.
of snow, compacting down on the roof and
Yep.
getting heavy, and in some of those areas, putting layers of shingles on top of layers of shingles, and that's no good because of the weight plus the winter, issues. But I work with military clients, which means that we tend to bounce from one side of the world to the other in a skinny minute.
Mhm.
And you mentioned that, and then you mentioned radon. Okay, I was licensed for 6 years before I ever encountered radon or had any knowledge of it whatsoever. And that's because we
Mhm.
moved to Tennessee, and it's more prevalent in Tennessee than it is in the Carolinas. It is not something that
Mhm.
is talked about, taught about, passed along in the Carolinas very much at all, at least on the eastern side, maybe
Mhm.
towards, the western side a little bit. So for people that are in situations like that where they are military or have jobs that tend to take them to different locations that they're
Mhm.
not familiar with, this is a huge leg up to understand some of the things that you just naturally would not know. I was talking to an
Yep.
agent in a post licensing class yesterday that's been licensed for 20 some odd years in Hawaii. Okay.
Mhm.
And it is like mind boggling. I mean, it is really like starting all over. His world is so different compared to anything that we do in North Carolina. So we were having a conversation about that last night. He was like, through the states that you're licensed in, are there any
Mhm.
similarities or what do you find in these areas? And we talked about some of that. I was like, I actually was able to go back to continuing education class in South Carolina and talk about injection wells and then also,
Mhm.
the radon stuff that we dealt with in Tennessee that was never a thing. So
Yep.
this could be huge for people that need to know some of the things that are location specific that sometimes
Mhm.
we sweep under the rug because it's our everyday what we're used to and we don't think, oh my goodness, this person may have never been in this part of the country and has absolutely no idea that this type of situation could occur and
Mhm.
what the ramifications of that could be, good or bad, right? So
Yep.
I think that's amazing.
Well, you don't have to worry about lava flow as much as the Hawaii folks do, for sure. I sold a house recently up in Maine, and the roof was 23 years old. It was original to the house,
Wow.
and it's a 25-year lifespan in Maine for a shingle roof. And no one ever talked about the age of the roof. I'm like, I'm ready to talk about it, but this roof is 23 years old. And now what we're seeing, especially in places like Carolina, is trouble getting insurance for older roofs. So
Hmm.
you may fall in love with this house and then discover that the insurance premium is astronomically high, or you can't get it at all. And
Yeah.
that's the other angle that we come in at is, what's the insurance implication of this location that you're in? So every location has something different. If you were looking at two houses on the same street, the differences would be, what condition is the roof in, and have there been permits that have been done for this location? A lot of the surrounding issues might be similar. Flood might be a little bit different, but neighborhood's a neighborhood. but there are still differences, even in houses in the neighborhood,
Mhm.
that you can point out using this data to help you make a better decision.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one of my terms that I always say to all of my clients, especially my buyers, is education equals empowerment. I make them listen to me for upwards of 2.5 hours before we ever go into a house to talk about the
Mhm,
process and everything that goes into it. But I can't speak to all of these things. One, I legally cannot speak to all of these things. I'm not a contractor. I don't have this, knowledge base.
mhm,
And sometimes don't always have all the resources available at my fingertips to find some of this information or know and be able to speak on it confidently. So it's really
mhm.
cool that it's a third party resource because we are the source of sources, right? That is our job, is to
Yep.
say, hey, if you're interested in this, this is where you can find information like this. And then
Yep.
let them take the buck and take it from there. But I would love to
Mhm,
have your take, if we're going to talk about three categories: buyers, sellers, and then real estate professionals.
mhm.
How could each category utilize this report to help us in decision making, or in our business, all the way around? How would it be good for each party?
Sure. For buyers, to me, it's a must-have because you want to know what you don't know, and this is the easiest way to find out not just what's happened, but the questions that you should ask to make sure you uncover other things. Now,
Hmm.
if it's a flip, which we'll flag, or if it's a quick sale where somebody hasn't been in the house that long, they might not know something that happened 5 years ago. So you'll want to ask that question. If they don't know it, then you want to tell the inspector, hey, make sure you take an extra look at this because something happened here at this location. I want to make sure that it's been completely fixed. So
Hmm.
for buyers, to me, it's a no-brainer. Get the information that you need before you make that big decision. For sellers, I think that knowing what buyers are going to be looking at and addressing those issues ahead of time gives you the ability to have a faster sale. Now, the market conditions are what they are, and pricing is what it is. But
Hmm.
you can say, okay, I know that these are the issues for this location, and I've taken proactive steps to solve for them. If you put that in the description of your listing, improve this, did this, we'll actually read it and use that as part of the decisioning for the house. So you can say, I've already taken care of some of these issues. I know what they
That's
are.
awesome.
So
Hmm.
if you want to come to me and get a discount because of something an inspector said, it's like, I've already addressed it. So hopefully it leads to a smoother close. And then for realtors, I think that for realtors, yeah, there are situations where we're going to come up with data, like we'll tell you whether there are sex offenders around a house. And that's something a realtor probably isn't going to tell you because you can't.
No,
Um,
I don't want to know. I don't want to know because
yeah,
then I got to disclose. Yeah. Hmm.
exactly. And realtors are, if you're in a hot market, and I'll look at a hot market versus a non-hot market. In a hot market, you want to get the listing, you put it out there, and you go, and you get multiple offers. And the value of something like this is nice, but a lot of times in a hot market, you have to waive an inspection contingency, and it's something that you may want people to get. In a hot market, the buyer especially should get it. In a market
Hmm.
that's a little bit more competitive, this gives you as the agent the ability to say, hey, listen, this is what people are looking at in your house. These are going to be potentially some of the deal breakers in this house. So let's address them up front so we can answer these questions honestly and clearly and help to get a better close by
Yep.
making sure that we know what the issues are ahead of time. Because we've talked to people, people list their houses after 30 years, like, I had no idea that some of these risks were around this area. And
Hmm.
people coming in are like, this is what we see. What have you done to prepare for it?
Right.
So, we think that like Carfax, you know, realtors aren't necessarily going to jump up and down and go, "Oh boy, here's a reason to interrupt this sale." It's not meant to be that. It's meant to just shrink that knowledge gap between the seller and the buyer to make for a smoother close and potentially to prevent post-settlement lawsuits, depending upon the
Right.
state that you're in, by saying, "We
I
address
didn't know.
this."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
No,
those are the three.
yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think the right when we need to butt out of things and just have information to give, it's really powerful. And at the end of the day, I don't want a buyer to buy a house and not have the information they needed and be upset at the after the fact, right? And as a
Yep.
seller, you don't want a buyer to purchase a house that is not satisfied with your home. It's not going to end well. Like you said, that is where a lot of post settlement lawsuits come into play because they feel like somebody put wool over their eyes or you
Mhm.
forced me into this situation to not
Yep.
have, inspections when really they didn't. It was a choice we made. And I
Mhm.
also tell sellers too, right? I think we forget this in the busyness of the real estate world. We think, great, dropping all these contingencies is fantastic. No inspections, no appraisal contingency. No, like we want a buyer to get an inspection on that house. Now, whether they can negotiate
Mhm.
repairs or not, that's a different conversation. But the more
Agreed.
knowledge and information they have on that property and they have done their own due diligence and they are confident in the property and move forward, then
Mhm.
we can sit back and confidently relax and say, okay, this is good. Like this, there's nothing that's going to sneak up on us. They have done their part. We have done our part. We did not
Mhm.
keep them from the property. I think that
Mhm.
that whole notion is really honestly quite ridiculous. It hurts the seller because there are so many issues that pop up after the fact. And I also
It,
feel,
it, it,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Bob.
it,
Right.
it's a really surprises always happen. A
Mm-hmm.
tree could fall through your roof. We're not going to predict whether the
100%.
tree will fall through your roof, and sometimes it happens, and you have to have that repair. But there are some things that are foreseeable. Like if you've got an 18-year-old HVAC system, chances are you're going to spend more money on that rather than less over the next few years because it's getting up there. Now, it might last longer. It might be like that fridge in your garage that grandma had that still works, but
Mm-hmm.
at a certain point, you're playing with house money because it's lasted longer than you've expected, but that shoe will drop at some point. And we just want to alert you to the fact that this is what we see.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And with the HVACs, they're transferring so often on what type of freon, coolant they can use inside of them.
Hmm.
And all of that plays in too, because you get to a point where you cannot extend the life of it anymore because you don't have the appropriate materials to be able to patch and fix and continue on. So that is very, very important. The other thing I think from a real estate professional standpoint that I was just thinking about is when you're saying, like, if we have an idea of the things that buyers might be looking for or trying to understand that they may not know about an area, like
Hmm.
sinkholes or the ice or whatever have you, a lot of times we
Hmm.
like to make these pretty property books and leave them there for showings. This would be
Hmm.
an awesome opportunity to have information on those type of things, like, hey, this is what a sinkhole is. This is what commonly causes a sinkhole. This is what you should be looking for. And this is what we
Hmm.
do if we have any of those indicators, right? So if there's an
Hmm.
injection well on the property, then you explain exactly why it's there and how that's a good thing that you actually have thought forward and you've taken action before something could have happened. And I think that's really cool if you're showing, all of the information. It's kind of like the lead-based paint pamphlets, right? We're supposed to give the lead-based paint
Hmm.
pamphlets and sign off saying, do we have any knowledge or not? And most of the time we don't, right? But and then we leave it at that. But if you
Hmm.
actually had like, hey, I don't have any knowledge of lead-based paint. However, I do know that the whole entire house, trim included, was painted in 2015.
Hmm. Yep.
Then that's
Yeah.
going to be a lot more reassuring.
Yeah. Generally, if the house was built before 1978, there's chances are you're going to have some lead paint and
Mm-hmm.
probably some asbestos. And if it was built, in the 50s, you're definitely going to have some asbestos, usually
Mm-hmm.
around the piping. And these are simple things to point out. It's not to tell you what to do. It's really designed to inform you about what to ask. So then
Mm-hmm.
you can determine what to do. And you can print out when you create the report in the system, you can print it out into a PDF and then make a 30 and
Yeah.
this is not like a 3-page report. This is a 30+ page report. So you can say, here's exactly what we see about the house and hope that nobody steals it because then you'll have to print another one out.
Right.
Mm,
Yeah, I don't know that I would leave the report hanging out on the property. I would probably take the information and really dive deep on like the important pieces that you're showing, that could be a concern. Or take the
yeah.
questions. You've mentioned a couple times that there's some questions that are prompted within the report. I would
Yep.
totally hone in on that as a realtor and say, hey, if this is a question a buyer's going to have, let's just type it up. Let's have a Q&A, like a fact sheet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing to understand about this data is it's the same data that insurance companies and mortgage companies look at when they're judging your house.
Mm,
Now we add to it, we add some things that they don't necessarily look at, but for the most part, the major things that we're looking at are the same things that they're looking at that they never share with you. So now we're trying to make this data available, information available, so we can share it with you and make you more, especially for military families, because you don't know where it's like you're going into some new place. Like for example, Camp Lejeune is a
right.
Superfund site. And if you're in certain places around Camp Lejeune, you're within the perimeter or you're close to the perimeter of the Superfund site. Some people don't want that.
Hmm.
Do you have a water filtration system in the house? Well, if you're near a Superfund site, you should. And little things like that to look out for properties in every place has exposure. The question is how much and what kind. And that's what we try to
Yeah.
help with.
So this is a little bit nitpicky, but I'm just curious. When you were talking about the West Coast, it reminded me of something that I've had with several military clients. A lot of
Mhm,
times, if they are predominantly used to the West Coast, they are used to
mhm,
a lot of gas appliances, including a gas dryer. On the East
mhm.
Coast, that is really not a thing. In your reports, does it kind of usually say what would be common for the area when it comes to appliances or something that might be different in that aspect? That the dryer specifically is what I'm thinking about because we
Mhm.
do not have gas dryers here on the East Coast. And I've had clients drag theirs from the West Coast. And I'm like, friend, you should have left that sucker or sold it because it's not doing you a bit of good here.
We don't have that insight. It would be
Okay.
interesting for us to build it. Because here's the other
Yeah.
thing is we keep on getting better. The real estate portals publish data and it's just here. Here's the data. And
Hmm.
we really try to get into things like that, to something a little more nuanced to help say this is what we see in this area. We do that with permits right now. Like if you go into a municipality or when you type in the location, we'll tell you what the permitting requirements are for that municipality, whether it's the
Nice.
city or the state or a place. And then we'll give you a link to say here's where you get more information. And if we have the permits, we'll drop them right in there. So that's the kind of information that would be kind of interesting to have. So we've had some experience in developing something like it, but we don't have it specifically. Like for example, if your washer dryer is on the second floor, then it
Yeah.
costs more to insure the house than if it's in the garage because if it leaks, it goes through multiple rooms. That's the
Right.
kind of nuanced information that's really hard to get right now. Long term, we want to work on that.
That's cool. Yeah. It's nice that you have a vision forward. You are obviously not done yet, and that's pretty cool.
Oh no.
Um,
Yeah, we're in the top of the second inning with the product right now. It's
nice.
there's a lot we want to do, including, to speak to that, and not to get too far forward, but we want to have people use their phone and when they're touring a house, just take some just take some video or some pictures and we'll read it to say, is this gas appliance? Is this electric
Mm,
appliance? How old is it? Is it on a recall? Are there spots on the wall that we want to take an extra look at because of potential mold concerns? Cracks in the basement if the house even has a basement. So
yeah.
that's long term. We're not there yet, but that's the kind of thing we want this to be, as comprehensive and as useful as possible. And sometimes the best person to get that is either the real estate agent or the person who's when you buy a house, you have to pay. The
Hmm.
agents are gone, the seller's gone, you have to pay. So we're trying
Yep.
to make it as useful as possible to the person who has to pay.
Right. No, I totally get that. I love that. I want to ask you just a couple little final fun questions just to see what
Sure.
you think. So, my first question is, what's a common mistake that you see from consumers in real estate transactions that could have been avoided if they would have had this report? So, what
Oh
mistakes have we
boy.
made? Yeah, something that's common, big or small, just something you've seen a lot, or just one massive thing that was a heavy hitter, whatever you want to go for.
I think the thing that surprises buyers the most that could be addressed with our stuff is post-sale expenses. Like,
Okay.
what are those surprise expenses? Is it the roof? Is it the HVA system? Is it the driveway or the pavement? Those are the things that we can identify. We actually have a little thing that we've just launched. That's a 2-year expected expense. Like, what are the systems? What should you be expecting to spend in the next couple of years? Because so many people just get leveled by surprise
Hmm.
expenses. So that's the number one thing: eliminating surprise expenses. Um, and then the second would be the roof. Um,
Okay. Cool.
there's so much problems with insurance companies and roofs right now, that
Hmm.
knowing that up front and saying, "Oh," because we'll actually say, if this looks sketchy, then go talk to an insurance agent before you make an offer, just to make sure that you can get insurance for this property.
Yep. Yep.
And that's those are the two big things. Is number one is surprise expenses, and number two is not being able to get insurance or having trouble getting insurance when we can tell them, you might have trouble getting insurance.
Yeah, check on this ahead of time. Yeah, I just had a conversation with a post, like a friend that was a past client that is buying up north, and the roof was a conversation we had. I was like, "Hey, before you do anything, you need to call your insurance company and just see what they say. Are you going to have any red flags here?" And it ended up being okay at this point, but they had also scrubbed and conditioned the roof, and it was an asphalt
Yep.
roof, and that was the first time I'd heard of that, and I was like, once again, that just goes to show different areas are different things, and, as soon as they
Yeah.
said that, I was like, "I need to ask one of my contractors, like, I have never heard of that before," you know?
Yep. Yep. The house we sold in Maine, that's why I owned it with my brother. That's what he did.
Yeah.
And it makes it look pretty from the sky, because a lot of insurance companies are
Oh,
using aerial imagery. So if you clean
gotcha.
up the roof, it looks nice. It's still 20 something years old, and still at the end of its useful life, it just looks pretty. It's
Mm,
like
mhm.
putting it's putting lipstick on a pig, as opposed to
Yes.
hope that wasn't too offensive. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, it gets used all the time. Um, so no, and I think too, I would love for you to use some of your insurance power to knock some sense into them about this roof stuff, because I just had an insurance agent tell a whole class of licensees that if a roof is like 10 or 15 years old, that they weren't going to do a full cost coverage replacement on it anymore. And even if it was
Yeah.
a 30-year roof, and that is mind-boggling to me. So there's some work to be done in that avenue. So if you can, poke some bears, I'd appreciate that.
Well, I'm trying to get the state of North Carolina, especially the coastal exposed areas, to make it a requirement that you build a hurricane resistant roof. Haven't had much luck with that right now. The
Yeah.
roof is the most important part of the house. It's the hat. It's the top hat for the house. And if the hat flies
Yep.
off, the house is in real trouble. But
Hmm.
it's because especially newer construction is not necessarily as diligently constructed as older construction, and
Yeah.
people come in and rip roofs, and I'll get you a new roof, and there's a lot of fraud. So if there's a
Mm.
hailstorm in an area and 3 or 4 houses get damaged, the roofer comes in and says, "I can get you a new roof." And
Hmm.
insurance companies have said, "I'm not necessarily down with that anymore." And
Hmm.
so it's a tough one, but you're right. Actually, in Texas, after 7 years, it goes to actual cash value of the roof,
Gosh.
and then in other states, it's 10 years that it goes to actual cash value of the roof. So you might find that if you buy a house with a 20-year-old roof and something happens to that roof, you're not going to get any insurance, because
Mm.
you've already tapped out the cash value of the house plus your deductible. You're paying for that roof yourself.
That is such a hard topic. I fear that like the future of that is that owners and contractors and builders alike will diminish the quality of what they want to put on the property, right? Like if
Mhm,
we tell them there's a reason to put on an architectural roof, then
mhm,
then they'll do it. But if I can't justify it, if I can't give them anything other than it's good for your property, which it is
mhm.
100%.
Yep.
But if there's no other value to be had there, gosh, like it's so hard, you know? So I hope that there's some improvements with that in the future because that's tough. I mean, and it's not a huge cost difference between some of the different styles of roofs to begin with. And I think that gets blown out of proportion too. But
It's, listen, sometimes when we overlook the fact that people really struggle to afford the house, and then you
mhm,
decide, oh, 18,000 versus $25,000 is a lot of money for
it is.
folks. Um, but I've fallen victim to this myself. When I bought my house in Minnesota, I didn't know that they had such a hail problem in Minnesota. And that's what my insurance premiums have gone up 50% in 3 years. And so when I built an extension, I could have put a class 4 shingle on there and
Hmm.
didn't know to do it. Would have been relatively short dollars compared to what I had to pay an extra insurance expense, but nobody told me about that stuff. And so
Yeah.
we want to be the people who help to tell you about that stuff. Like your good uncle who tells you all the good stuff that
Yeah.
you need
Yeah.
to know.
No, I love that. And, we don't always have replacement cost values either. Like, once again, that's not something that me as a realtor, like that I can suggest or have ideas on. I simply have to
Mhm.
say, well, go talk to that contractor. And for a buyer to be calling, five different contractors to figure out how much plumbing systems might cost, and HVAC might cost, a roof might cost, just having a guide could be super helpful to them just to make sure they can wrap their head around it, simply put. I mean, like you just said, sometimes especially in the military world, cash is not plentiful. It just
Right.
isn't, and that's
Hmm.
that's not the norm for them. So they need to understand what the potential is there and make sure that they're okay and that they can handle it. So I
Yep.
thoroughly appreciate that.
Well, we try. That's our job. And some people don't like clarity. We think that transparency is good. Some people don't. Those people, I don't want to buy a house from them anyway. So I don't care how nice it
Yes,
is.
yes, yes. Nope. Transparency is key. So, what is one piece of data in your report that tends to surprise people that they don't expect to be in there? They're like, "Whoa, I never knew about that."
Hmm. There's a few. I think the age of the roof is certainly number one.
Hmm.
The flood zone is determination is number two, and the flooding possibility of that house is number two. But number three is sex offenders. I didn't know there were
Hmm.
sex offenders around here.
Hmm.
We don't necessarily want to lean on that. It's just one of those things, and we don't tell people don't buy this house because there's sex offenders nearby. We say, have you had any issues with any of the neighbors, and make sure you put up some cameras around the house,
Hmm.
to protect your family. So those are three of the big ones. um and then always the weather perils. Like, I didn't know that there was a 65-mile-an-hour wind here. I'm like, yeah, there was. So
Oh yeah.
we can tell you that.
Yeah, I can tell you when we moved to Tennessee, I didn't expect us to be in Tornado Alley. We were on the Kentucky border, and my neighborhood, across the street from my neighborhood, had a tornado go straight through it.
Yep.
It was insanity. We walked out and said, "Okay, everything's good." And I said, I'm about to write an offer on a house across the street. Can we just drive by it?" And sure enough, it had damage. I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
"Holy cow!" Like, thank goodness we did that. My client, we just seen it earlier that day. So.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story about a house in Southern California. It's a $10 million house, and they were
Wow.
one day from closing escrow, and there was a wildfire, and it caught on fire. And it wasn't wildfire prone. Now, we had identified it as wildfire prone, but no one ever talked about it. And then the house
Hmm.
burned to the ground before the transaction could happen, which is
Oh,
awful. I feel terrible for everybody. But
right.
everybody thinks it's going to happen to somebody else
Yeah.
until it happens to them, and then they're hyper aware of it. But what we're there to say, hey, here's what we see for this specific location.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what I hear too the most when you're talking about the things that tend to surprise people in this report, or the data that they're looking for, it's simply the fact that they're able to get it in one spot, right? Some of
Yep.
the stuff, it exists, but you have
Yep.
to go digging for it in a lot of different locations. And
Yep.
once again, as a realtor, a lot of times we give those resources and it's overwhelming, and our clients don't really do much with it because it's too much, too time consuming. And if they have to go to five different websites, they're not checking into it. Versus if something
No.
just comes to their email and they're able to poke through it as they want to, then that's definitely huge. So
Yep.
my last question is if you could leave us with one big takeaway about making real estate decisions better, what would it be?
Mhm.
Like, what could this report do to make us make more solid real estate decisions all the way around?
I would say that the worst time to make multi-$100,000 decisions is when you first fall in love. We've all fallen prey to
Mm-hmm.
that in the past where we've
Mm-hmm.
thought we were in love and we spent a lot of money. When you buy a house, you fall in love with that house and then you make an offer on it. It would be better to know these things before you fall in love rather than after, because you can make a more logical and reasoned decision when you're not in the throes of being in love with the property.
Mm-hmm.
So, that to me is what makes for a better, you go in with your eyes wide open is
Yeah.
is is the way I'd say it.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I actually just was picking at one of my clients. I'm going to be selling their house and they're buying in a different state. And they said, we found this property and we're excited about it, but I'm trying not to get too excited about it because we've just started. And I said, I always think like when you're shopping for a house, it's like dating, right? You have those
Yeah,
fun, nervous butterflies where it's like, oh my gosh, this house that has so much potential and I can see it, all of the future. But then there's
yeah,
also the anxiety of all of the unknowns, right?
yes,
And we certainly can't control what's happening on the other side, but this is a
right.
huge chunk of that that could actually take away that void of the unknowns. So there's a definitely a lot to be had there.
You
It's like
know,
doing a background check on somebody before you go to on a date. I love that.
e- exactly. You wouldn't buy a
Yes.
used car without a Carfax. Why buy a
Hmm.
used house without a property lens report?
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Is there anything else that you think that we should know about Property Lens? Like, how do we find you? Where do we get these reports?
You can go to www.propertylens.com, lens.com, like it under a microscope, and type in an address and off you go. You can buy one report, you can buy three, you can buy five, you can buy 10, depending upon where you are in the buying process. If you don't like the first report that you get, then you tell us and we'll give you your money back.
Okay.
So that's the easiest way in. Um, yeah, and if you follow on the socials, it's under My Property Lens on Instagram, and I think we're on the TikTok and all that stuff. Although that TikTok confuses me, so I have to have people do that for me.
Yeah, I don't touch it either.
Yeah,
Somebody was saying what? Oh, Threads, the new Instagram piece. They're like, oh, it's like Twitter. I was like, yeah, I
yeah,
never
no,
did that. I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry.
yeah, yeah. I like Instagram. That's the one that we spend the most time on. We're also on the
Yeah,
Facebook and all. I still call it the Facebook. So,
the Facebook.
yeah, it's yeah, on all the socials you can find us. Just go into your browser and type in
Cool.
Property Lens, and you'll see it.
And just to clarify, you can do reports on anywhere in the US. Are you doing it anywhere outside of the US? What does that look like?
It is everywhere in the U.S. with the exception of Alaska, because
Okay.
we don't have good aerial imagery in Alaska, and a lot of what we do is really dependent upon good data everywhere. So Alaska, not yet, but
Okay.
the other 49 states we're good at.
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you so much. This has been a wealth of information and knowledge, and I know that my listeners are going to absolutely love it. And I imagine they're going to start poking and prodding a lot more. I know for a fact that military people really like information. They want
Mhm.
to know what they're getting into, and they don't want fluff. They want like just tell me what's going on so that I can make a decision because I have this much time to make a decision. So I think
Exactly.
that this really could be super helpful to the military market on either side of the fence for sure. So thank you again for all of your knowledge and all of your help and expertise with all of this.
Brittany, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Hey, I just wanted to say thank you for being here and listening in on this episode of Closing Chapters with me. I truly enjoy putting this content together, and I hope that you enjoy it too. If so, could you like, subscribe, and share this episode with somebody you know that will enjoy it just as much as you did? Thank you so much.